Welcome to the HR Community Podcast. My name is Shane O'Neill, founder of Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Each episode we will host HR leaders and discuss their journey and discover best practice HR solutions across the HR industry. Whether you're a CEO, HR executive, or operating across the wider HR space, this podcast is for you. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to comment and share your reviews. Enjoy the episode. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the HR Community Podcast. This morning, I'm joined with Marie-Claire Ross. A little bit of a twist with our guests this morning. Marie-Claire Ross is a facilitator, speaker, mentor, and author. Huge advocate within the trust and leadership space. Marie-Claire is a workplace sociologist and founder of Trustologie. Good morning, Marie-Claire.
Hey, Shane. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks so much for joining us on the show this morning. Just thought I'd maybe pass the mic over to you, Marie-Claire, if you wanted to maybe give us a bit of a run through who you were, what your background is. I know it's not the sort of more traditional or typical HR related guest that we have on the show. So definitely very interesting for listeners to hear a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, well, I'm really weird. So I've had a very varied career. After uni, I started in market research where I do big research studies for companies, and that was lots of fun. And then I ended up co-founding a video production company, which I ran for many years. And it was actually in that where I really learned how to lead teams in different locations. And that was really what seeded within me the need to teach leaders to build trust, which is what I do now.
Fantastic. Awesome. And you've also published a book which goes into a lot of detail, which we will touch on as well around that. That's right?
Yeah, that's right.
Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, the book is Trusted to Thrive, How Leaders Create Accountable and Connected Teams. And it's one of those lockdown books. Like a lot of people, we wrote books during lockdown. And the reason I wrote it was that I had a lot of leaders that were saying to me, oh my gosh, how do I lead my team when they're not in the same room as me? How do I build trust when I can't see what they're doing? And it did raise a lot of issues. So the book really gives leaders a roadmap as to what they can do to connect better with their employees, no matter if they're in the office or they're working from home.
Yeah, for sure. Leadership is a huge topic in HR at the moment, and a lot of the guests that we've had on the show have gone into detail with what they do from a leadership perspective, whether it's with their teams, their businesses, or some other executive team. What would you say is sort of the definition or your definition of trust and leadership, Marie-Claire?
Well, I suppose I actually break them down differently. So I'll start with trust. So trust really is when you can confidently rely on someone to do the right thing and make good on their promises. So trust really is that reliability piece. And if you think about it, and particularly in a workplace, we have to trust everyone. Everyone has to trust each other. And it's from the top right down to the bottom. It needs to flow all the way down, because without that, things get really stuck. Things just don't happen. You get a lot of infighting. And trust is that piece that, without it, it really slows things down. And people hold back their commitment. You can't innovate. You can't talk openly about issues if there's no trust. And this is really important because, if people aren't talking to you about any potential problems, it can really derail you if you don't know what's going on. So trust really is that thing that, as human beings, we really need that to be able to work with others. And when we don't have that, and sometimes we're not even aware that we don't have it, but we just react in a way that's not great for group dynamics. Whereas leadership to me is more about, there's lots of different ways of describing it, but it's really when you are getting people to work together in the service of a shared goal. And, but of course, to do that, everyone has to trust one another. So people have to trust their boss, the boss has to trust them, and then people within the team have to trust each other. And then across teams, of course, where you get the majority of issues is really important as well.
Yeah, awesome. And in terms of that, you touched on something there in terms of awareness. So having the awareness around trust, which some of us may or may not have. Some of us may have been in a situation where it's caused us to now, have our guard up a little bit. So, I mean, how would you identify your awareness to trust and how easy you are to trust your leader or have them trust you, Marie-Claire?
So it's on quite a variety of levels. So sometimes, I work with a lot of leaders who, might have had a poor 360 degree. And so they're not trusted by other leaders or other people in the business, but they're totally unaware. And it really taps into self-awareness. There was a study done by a woman by the name of Dr. Tash Ulrich. She's written a book called Insight, and she actually found that only 5 to 15% of leaders are actually self-aware.
Wow.
And why that's so, and what they've actually found is self-awareness is one of the critical capabilities of a leader. But of course, we're not aware of things that we don't know about ourselves. So being more self-aware also makes you more likely to be aware of when you trust people and when you don't, when you pull back or when you fully contribute. So there's so many different layers to it, but it's critical to understanding who we really are, because once we know that, then we're more likely to understand who we trust and when we don't trust people, and work within, breaking that down.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can sort of start to transition into some of the models that you discuss, particularly in your book, Trusted to Thrive. And I know that you've used some of these approaches with a number of clients, some large organizations that we talked about earlier. So if I was to sort of select one in particular, which I think we both agreed was sort of one of the more common models, around the achievement zone model, maybe tell us a little bit about that, Marie-Claire, and then we can start to sort of chip away at the 4 different elements.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I was watching a TED Talk, and it was by Dr. Amy Edmondson. Now, she's the woman who coined the term psychological safety in the workplace, which is where you can take risks, make mistakes, be yourself, and you still will be accepted and loved by your team. You won't get thrown out. And she was doing a research study where she was looking at psychological safety and high standards. And she found that when those two collided, they created high performance. And it makes sense. So you can't, a lot of people think psychological safety, oh no, it's where you create this environment where anything goes. But it only really works well if you create safety as a leader, but you also create, you make sure people are accountable. And she talked about high standards, but I do a lot of research in companies because I have this market research background. And what I found was it was accountability that was more important. And so when I extrapolated that, it created 4 zones. So if you imagine you have on the Y and the X axis psychological safety and accountability. So down the bottom, you'll have low, which is what I call the apathy zone, which is low safety, low accountability. And then to the right, there's the abatement zone, which is low accountability, but high psychological safety. But did you want me to step through those 4 zones?
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah, if you could sort of walk us through the apathy, anxiety, achievement, and abatement.
Yeah, so the apathy zone, which is low in both, this is one of those zones that's typically led by a leader that, really likes the technical work, doesn't really like leading people. Sometimes they can be emotionally volatile, really critical. So people in that team, they're just surviving. They're doing everything they can to not get into trouble. So they're not innovating. They're not doing anything new. Sometimes they don't even get along with each other. It can be this really horrible atmosphere. And, people drop into the apathy zone when they're ready to quit their job. And then we have, and sometimes leaders are leading from that, even though they like their team and they like people, they're under managing people because they might have too many other projects outside of the team to be working on.
Yeah.
And then you have the abatement zone. Now, do you know what abatement means?
I don't actually, if I'm honest.
I didn't know either. I was looking for an A word because I thought it was going to be something around comfort zone or status quo. Yeah. But abatement means declining in performance or decline. Okay. And what I find really interesting about that is in my research in organizations, when people are in the abatement zone, because they have this kind of hubris. So they think, usually teams fall into this zone when they've had a lot of past success. And I think, well, we're so great. We don't have to do anything new. We don't have to fix things. We don't have to look at things differently because we're great. Everything's working. We're brilliant. And so they have this overconfidence. And so what you'll find is that over time their performance is declining, but they don't know about it.
Yeah,
so
right.
These are the teams that don't like change. They just want to keep doing things the way they've always done. They what you'll find is that the leader themselves might have had some personal issue or just exhausted or isn't driving themselves as hard as they used to. So they're all coasting. So the leaders coasting a bit, maybe because they need to. They're not pulling their people up. So people are just, doing the bare minimum. So you'll find at this level that the leader slowly becomes busier as they can't rely on their staff to get things done. They'll reverse delegate. They'll delegate to their direct report. He'll just say, no, I can't do it. You do it, and give it back to them.
Yeah. That's interesting. And it's interesting because if you look at, particularly in my industry and recruitment over the last 12 months or so, with the market being so active, there's probably a lot of teams out there who have been high performing. Now, this market is a little bit different because there are some facets and factors across the globe that are manipulating the recruitment market a little bit now. So I can imagine some of those teams maybe coasting along, like you say, thinking that things will continue the way they are, but in the hindsight, it can't possibly be the way things were because it's a different market, it's a different approach, it's completely different in theory,
Yeah, and you're right, man. It's those teams that miss things. They do miss the industry changes and they get left behind. What I found in my research was that those teams actually, in the end, perform worse than apathy zone teams.
Wow. Because
they're just falling behind without realizing it.
Interesting. And do you think it's possible for one team, well, if we were to take the example of the team and leadership, like you say, if we were to look at one team in leadership to potentially go from one zone to the other as in a transition, or?
Yeah, so they do transition through the zones. And the really interesting thing is you can have a team that might be in one, but individuals will be in different zones and the leader themselves. Usually the team leader and the team zone marry up together, but not always.
Yeah.
But the trick is for a leader to know where their members are in those 4 zones and to bring them right through to the achievement zone. And that takes time and work.
Yeah, exactly. So there's 2 other zones. You touched on achievement and there's one other. Yeah. Yeah,
there's the anxiety zone. So the anxiety zone performance is really good. So this is where you have really good accountability, really high, but low psychological safety. So this can be for a number of reasons. So this is usually a team, things get done, they're meeting plans, they're getting things done. It's all about getting stuff done. So it's really about, people become the thing that's left behind. more about getting things done than caring about people. So this is the zone where, mental health issues become really quite common. And people feel alone. It's all about individual results, not team results. And leaders, can be so overwhelmed with how much they have to do. So they're driving everyone, but they're not really caring about people's well-being or even their own. And sometimes the team can be quite safe in terms of the dynamics and the leader, but the market dynamics are making it unsafe. So they might have really demanding customers or really tight deadlines that make things hard. So the anxiety zone, really good for getting things done. But, you can't be there for a really long time because it is exhausting. And, people just drop straight down into the apathy zone.
Yeah, right. How interesting. And you're right. I mean, the well-being is such a heavy topic right now. And it has been for years, but I think now more than ever, because again, companies sort of bounce back after the pandemic, a lot of hiring, a lot of pressure, a lot of workload. And if I was to particularly focus on our community, which is the HR and HSE community, that demand is continuous. There's very few HR leaders I've spoken to recently that said things have slowed down or, that the to-do list is getting shorter. So.
Yeah, that's right. And, some people, for some of us, we operate in that zone. Like I'm always like, I love getting things done.
Yeah.
So my operas, where I operate is mostly in that anxiety zone. But what I do aim for, and what we all aim for, is the achievement zone. So that's where we have high psychological safety and high accountability. This is led by a leader who really is challenging themselves and everyone in their team. And people are challenging one another in this really supportive environment. And to drive that constant need for change, an ability to embrace change, it really is driven by a leader who is getting people to, have that curiosity to look at things differently, to learn from mistakes, to be able to make mistakes and not get into trouble, and to really be excited about the future and where they're going and knowing that the effort is going to be worth it.
Awesome. Amazing. And we talked a little bit about each zone there, and I'm sure listeners are thinking, that's the zone that we're in, but much prefer to be an achievement. How would HR leaders approach this? So they've identified, okay, we as a leadership team, we as a HR team, we as an overall business are sort of sitting in the anxiety zone or the abatement zone, and we want to get to achievement. So what's the sort of first stage in that process, Marie Claire? Is it sort of, approaching it, dropping your guard and just saying, hey, I think we're not where we need to be, but I've got an idea how to get there? What do you sort of generally do with leaders that you work with?
Yeah, well, what really works well is that this model is a really good discussion piece.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies like to sit down with their teams and just talk about where they're at, work out with the team. Where do you think we're at? And then it's through that discussion, then you can work out the prescriptions on what to move forward.
Yeah.
So, for example, like when you're in the apathy zone, that's a really low performing team. So, to actually get a team out of that, the leader's effort is like 10 times the effort needed at the achievement zone level, the impact required. And that's because everyone in that team needs time to be empowered, to really understand what they're doing, the meaning of their job, how they're making a difference, to even, be congratulated and acknowledged for the work that they're doing, to feel needed and validated. And so, I've got lots of articles and things in my book about this, but the steps that need to be taken. But it's really about building a one-on-one relationship more at, say, the apathy zone level than in the abatement zone level.
Yeah, exactly. We see it in, work life, professional life all the time. We also see it in sport, the high-performing team this season in football or rugby or cricket or whatever. Suddenly there's that decline, and from the outside it's very hard to know what's happening, but it's really interesting when you walk through the different zones, having that conversation with your team and having that open forum where, people can share their thoughts, feelings, ideas, feedback sounds like to be the main ingredients into getting to the achievement zone, which seems to be the best place to be.
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting. I was doing work with a leadership team at their offsite, and I got all of the executives in the room to work out where they were. And then we went around the room and they, explained. And I had two of the guys in the team confess that they were in the abatement zone, which was fascinating. And when I asked a bit more and we talked about it a bit more, it was evident that the CEO wasn't making them accountable, which was actually a huge issue in the company. It also come up with some other research I'd done. And so then we had to have a conversation with the CEO about, why they weren't holding people to account. And that, was very interesting. So just being able to talk about it, they actually needed to talk about it, because what was interesting was that they knew they were in the abatement zone and it was frustrating them. They didn't want to be there, but it was just this culture where they didn't have to meet their goals. And it was, eating at them.
Yeah. And then, you talked a little bit about the different zones there and the approach. I guess now we'll take it one step further for listeners and talk a little bit about, where we go from here type approach. So you and I talked a little bit about the integrated trust building system as well. And there was 3 key steps within that: fostering safety, creating connection, stepping into that meaningful future. Can you tell us a little bit more about that system, Marie-Claire?
Yeah, well, I suppose, just to kind of summarize it, if you think about the 3 things that you mentioned, they're like the main practices leaders need to learn, because they're like the ropes that help their employees feel connected. So it's a bit like the tethers that keep astronauts tied to the spaceship. So, astronauts have to go out, do a spacewalk to check out the equipment, do some experiments. But, by being tethered to the ship, of course, they're safe. They're not going to fly off. And, every leader needs to, be like a spacecraft that really connects their direct reports so that they're able to explore, learn new things, and feel like that they can work at their highest level. And so leaders really do provide the security that people need, that they're connected and protected, not only to their leader, but to the team as well. So according to neuroscience, fostering safety is really important, and creating connection, and what I call stepping into a meaningful future. So I'll leave the psychological safety, fostering safety, because we know a lot about that.
Yeah.
But I'll just go into the other 2 components. So the creating connection, what I found in my research, it's not just, of course, that sense of belonging that people really need in a team, but they also need to know how everything in an organization connects together. So a leader is a bit like, one of their roles is to connect the dots of all the pieces and parts and projects and priorities, a bit like helping people see the big jigsaw puzzle and how they're, what piece they are or what piece they play in the organization to create that vision. And so leaders really need to be clear on helping people understand how their work provides meaning, because meaningful work is really important for our well-being and for our engagement. So it's really connecting people to how their work benefits them, the boss, to themselves, what's in it for the individual, and what's in it, how they're helping internal customers or external customers. All those sorts of things connect together. And the more leaders can explain that and connect to people, not only will they do better work and make better decisions, but they really feel like they're valued, they're connected, that they're making a difference, and all those things that we need to actually make us feel better as human beings and do work at a high level.
Fantastic. And I really, I enjoy all steps, but that last step about the meaningful future, I think really resonates, because it's all good and well sitting down and having these workshops and having these sessions and talking about our challenges and our gaps and, where we want to go, where we are now, where we want to go. But then if you don't have a plan in place, like a pretty measurable plan ahead, you find that human nature, we sort of fall back into that comfort zone again. So I think it's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, so stepping into a meaningful future, people need to know that their work and their effort's going to be worth it. So, when we talk about the future, we're really getting into like the prefrontal cortex. So a really more powerful, positive part of the brain that, when people, it really generates excitement. So, as a leader, we want to be talking about that because, what I found in my research a lot was that particularly for mid-sized companies, people would say to me, people are just gossiping a lot. They're doing the wrong thing. And what I'd find was that because the CEO wasn't, talking about a compelling vision, people were lost. They didn't really know what they were doing. They were just going through the motions. So even team leaders in big companies need to make that vision really clear so that people can really see the rewards. And what I found in my research in really big organizations was that what employees think of, okay, well, there's the vision. Thanks for that. I get it. But what's my part in it? What's my career progression? What skills do I need? And that excites them because they can think, oh, these are my gaps. This is what I need to achieve to get to do the vision. What training are you going to give me? What support? What learning support? What can I do? What promotional opportunities? They're really important drivers for people. There's so much research that the more people learn on the job, the more engaged they are in their work. People want to expand and grow. We've just got to give them those opportunities. And a good leader, really explains that well and gives people the support they need in their careers.
100%. And you see some of those leaders, quite obviously, based on some of the brands that they operate and run and represent, and regardless of industry or level in the business, you can see some of the frontline leaders, casual staff, right through to the executive team, all feeling a purposeful position in the business. And it does come across, whether you're selling a product or providing a service or whatever, there are some amazing organizations that are obviously doing that really well out there.
Yeah, true.
Now, we talked a little bit about the trust building system. Let's talk a little bit about the roadmap. So that sort of roadmap exercise and an element sort of based off a couple of the other facets that we spoke about, Marie-Claire.
Yes. So the roadmap is with the 9 boxes. Yeah. So that forms the curriculum. So I have a trusted teams leadership development program. So, with psychological safety, according to the research that, there are like 3 things that leaders need to focus on. So and just to talk about one of them, because I know I'm going to run out of time, but, really leaders who can create a learning environment. What I find really amazing about learning is that when we're learning, it's safe. When it's safe to learn, when we're not getting into trouble for making mistakes, it's good. And of course, we don't learn if we're not safe. So there's this really interesting, you have to have both. They both are inextricably linked, learning and safety. Yeah. So being able to create that is really so critical. I sometimes observe team meetings, and I observed this team meeting at this large organization, and the CIO, he really thought he created safety, but when someone would question him, he'd start yelling back at them and he'd cross his arms and he'd say, "Why are you asking that question? That's a stupid question." And then he'd answer the question, okay, but he didn't realize that how frightening he was.
Yeah. How funny is that? Look, I know we're sort of out of time and I would love to sit here and talk about this for hours because it's really, really interesting. You mentioned, actually, before I say that, we recently spoke with another HR leader actually about networking and learning and, developing and, how to sort of best build your personal and professional life more relevantly in HR. You have a mastermind that you've just launched, which I think is really interesting, and I think it'd be really interesting for people to hear about what that is and what's involved.
Oh, yeah. So what I find, like with a lot of my programs, like I'll go in and do a training program for a day, half a day, and what the participants will say is, "I need to learn more. there's not enough time, or I need more time on this. And particularly, as I mentioned before, self-awareness, which is one of the critical leadership skills. So I've really sat down and worked out, well, how can I help team leaders learn this stuff, more deeply, particularly the self-awareness piece, because I love to do, I do like with my coaching clients, Enneagram assessments, and really go into their personality to help them understand their leadership drivers and unpack their leadership goals. And the research really shows that when leaders do that, they're more likely to get more out of their leadership development programs. So the Leadership Mastermind is a 12-month immersive program where we spend the first term is on leading yourself, which is that self-awareness piece. Then it's about leading your direct reports. Then it's about leading your team. And so there's online classes, group coaching, one-on-one time with me, and, we're connecting as a community. It's called the Tribe of Trusted Leaders, Leadership Mastermind, because what I find, and this, it's so heartening. There's so many leaders out there that want to do the right thing by their people, want to be a good people manager, but we're just, not supporting them as deeply as they really want to be supported. So this mastermind helps with that.
Yeah, fantastic. And it couldn't come in a better time because, like you say, with the leaders, I'm finding as well with a lot of changes around us in the economy and the work environment. There are some industries and some companies that are seeing more changes than others. So I guess for a leader, although there is that sort of element of representing and protecting the business, doing that in a particular way to support the people within the organization is critical. So I think, I think it's a really good investment for anyone out there that's interested. We will sort of wrap up there. And just before we do, I did want to say, if anyone has any questions, queries, and wants to dig a bit deeper into this kind of stuff like I did, feel free to reach out to me or Marie-Claire directly, and I'm sure one of us will be able to point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marie-Claire. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for all the good questions, and it's been a great conversation.
It certainly has. All the best. Thank you, listeners. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the HR Community Podcast. Remember to like and subscribe and share your views and comments below. This podcast was brought to you by Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Whether you're a candidate looking for a new role or organization looking to secure brand new talent for your team, please get in touch with us today. Thank you.